Hi guys, it's Aoife from Fred We See Dad Laughing, and I'm here with a weekly wrap up. So these are all the books I read last week and the one book I've read this week so far, because obviously I'm going away tomorrow and I won't be able to do my weekly wrap up this week, so I'm just going to do kind of a bi-weekly week and a half wrap up instead. So the last time I did my wrap up, I was saying that I was reading The City in the Middle of the Night by Charlie Jane Anders. This is a sci-fi book and it is really weird, so please bear with me while I try and explain this book. This is set on another planet that humans seem to have inhabited. The planet is, there's two different cities on this planet that are separated by miles and miles of really terrible wilderness that can kill someone. The cold can kill people. There's these like wild creatures that will kill people. It's just really, really dangerous. And the world also seems to be like, basically sun and dark seem to be controlled a lot, and there's one city where things are like seem to be much freer and people, you know, it's a little bit messy but people are kind of free to do whatever they want. And then there's another city that's a lot more controlled. People are told when to sleep, when to wake up, they're given specific jobs to do. There's very much a hierarchy in lower class and higher class, and yeah, it's kind of, you don't really know, there seems to be like good and bad things about each city, and we do see our characters living in each city, and I think it's kind of up to the reader to decide what is actually best, and what is actually more corrupt like at the end of things. We are following one character called Sophia, or not Sophia, her name's Sophie, sorry, Sophie, and she basically is thrown out. Something happens and she ends up being thrown out into kind of like the wilderness at one point as at this trial for a night, and everyone basically who's done this before has died, but she ends up meeting one of these creatures that live in this wilderness, and the humans on this earth call them crocodiles, and she ends up having this weird kind of connection with this creature, and she finds out that these creatures are actually really, really smart, and they do actually kind of want to team up with humans and see what they can do together, and if they can all actually live a more harmonious, better life together if they all work together. So Sophie ends up kind of trying to figure out how she can kind of make that happen, while at the same time there's a lot more other political stuff going on with other characters in this book, and we see Sophie go from one city to another and try and go back again and trying to decide what to do and convince friends and everyone to help her with trusting these crocodile creatures. That is the best I can do with this. This is a really, really odd book. What I will say, the writing in it is beautiful. The writing is really, really beautiful. Charlie Jane Anders knows how to write. She knows how to write a really beautiful story. But it is a very confusing story. And it's a story that's kind of hard to really figure out what the end goal was, because I feel like we didn't really get enough answers. It's left very open-ended. I didn't really feel satisfied when I finished this. I think I just would have loved to know more. I feel like I was left wanting more, but not in a good way, really. There was a character in this that Sophie was kind of obsessed with. It was like a best friend of hers who she had really strong feelings for, and I never really understood why Sophia liked this other person so much. Like this other person, like this girl, she wasn't a very nice character, and Sophie was just so obsessed with her, and she made really stupid decisions because of this girl, and she went like against her gut feeling so many times, and it kind of got a bit tiresome and a bit repetitive after a while that Sophie kept making these bad decisions because of this girl. So yeah, that kind of got a little bit annoying as well. There is a side character in this called Mouth who is really interesting. She's a really interesting backstory. Would have loved to have known even more about her. I feel like she could have a whole novella just by herself. She was great. Yeah, so I liked this, but I didn't love it, and I do feel like it did have a lot of flaws. I think you have to be a very specific type of reader to really love this book, otherwise you will probably struggle with it. So I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor. This is a book set in kind of a dystopian Africa, and we are following this young girl called Nnedi Sonwu, which basically translates into her mother's language as Who Fears Death. And Nnedi is a type of person. There's something called an Iru, which means that and apologies if I'm saying these words incorrectly, I'm not actually sure if I am or not, but she's something called an Iru in this book, which basically means she's a child born from rape. So her mother was raped by soldiers from this neighbouring land who are like basically terrorising this part of Africa that Nnedi and her mother live in, and her mother was raped and Nnedi was born, and she looks completely different to other people, and children who are born from rape always seem to, they look really, really differently, and they can be told apart from other people. People know how they were born, how they were conceived, and they're thought to be a little bit like, you know, some people think they're bad luck, other people just, you know, they can be shunned from society, other people might, you know, be obsessed with them, and it kind of seems to vary depending on where they are in the world. And Nnedi herself is actually really special because she actually seems to have these kind of magical powers, and she eventually in this book ends up going into training with a sorcerer to learn how to be a sorcerer with these powers and to use her powers, and she kind of ends up eventually trying to go on a journey of revenge against her father for what he did to her mother, and obviously her father isn't really a nice man, and she kind of goes on this journey of revenge with a few of her friends. I liked this book, didn't love it. I really enjoyed the amount of African culture and kind of, you know, the characters in this, all the characters in this are obviously black, they are African, they have all these culture, they all have all these traditions, and there's so much rich kind of history and culture and in the book, which I really, really loved. I really love kind of getting this setting and just, you know, really kind of envisioning the village that Nnedi was growing up in and the magic she was learning and her friends, and I really liked how Nnedi Okorafor touched on a lot of really great subjects in this. I should also say, I should have said this at the start, but there are really, really, really obviously strong content warnings, trigger warnings against sexual assault, against rape, against female genital mutilation, so FGM, what else, there's just general violence, yeah, there's a lot of trigger warnings in this book, so be very prepared going into it if you are someone who's sensitive to those things. But I do really like, there was a very good conversation around FGM, why some people do it, kind of how ridiculous it is in a way, but also why some girls do feel like they have to do, why some girls are forced into doing it. So yeah, I really enjoyed that was there. I did feel like this kind of lost, not that it lost its way around the middle, but I actually think the story got a little bit boring. I feel like it just needed a little bit more oomph at some stages, and then the end of it just seemed really, really quick and wrapped up very quickly. I think this book was just missing something. It was just missing a bite to it in the middle part. I really liked kind of the start of it, and the end was good despite it being quite quickly wrapped up, but there was just a little bit in the middle where it dragged for me. So I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars overall. The next book I read was Educated by Tara Westover. This is a non-fiction book about Tara Westover's life growing up in a family who are extremely Mormon. She wasn't raised, she wasn't born in a hospital, she wasn't given a birth certificate when she was born, her birth wasn't registered because her father kind of is like very anti-government and very paranoid. He doesn't send his children to school. She wasn't really educated in a way. She was homeschooled in a way, but not in an actual, like, she wasn't really homeschooled. She just was kind of taught to read by her brothers and then taught herself everything else. And this is basically her like explaining how she grew up, the difficulties of her growing up, what her family was like, and then how she eventually ended up going to college, going into Cambridge, going to Harvard, and just becoming a really, really educated person in the end. I really enjoyed this. I've heard a lot about this book, so I wasn't really sure. I do feel like I did have particular expectations going into this. I couldn't help but do so, but I did end up very much enjoying this book. This is the kind of book that made me angry, and it made me angry because I just do not understand how parents can get away with not schooling their children, not vaccinating their children, letting their children, like in a first world country like America, how these things happen are just beyond me. I just don't understand it, and I know it happens in every country in the world, but just things like, you know, not proper schooling, no vaccinations, no proper medical treatments for anything. I actually just don't really understand how Tara and her brothers and sisters really all got to adulthood with all their limbs more or less intact, because, and like, even like, I don't like how they didn't die of infection, because it just seemed like they were growing up filthy. They were getting so many, like, their dad had a junkyard, so they were getting incredibly injured, to the point where I just couldn't understand that they weren't all disfigured because of the injuries they were getting, and obviously because they weren't actually getting hospital treatment for it. It's just insane, and you just do have to wonder a little bit about it. I did really like Tara's voice in this. I will say there are parts in this book where she's talking about something and then she'll actually be like, this was a memory but actually wasn't a memory, it might have been a dream, or this was a memory but my brothers don't remember it this way, or no one else in my family remembers it this way, and you have to be kind of like how how did it actually happen? And she does kind of explain at the end. She has like a little bit at the end about all the different things in the book where there are different memories and there are contradictions in her family about how things happened. So there is a kind of thing where this book where I'm a little bit like, oh, but did everything actually happen the way she said it did? You know, just because obviously memory can be subjective, and particularly with this type of story where there's a lot of trauma involved, you do wonder how much could be suppressed, how much could be changed just by the way your mind works. Yeah, it is a little bit like, I did question a little bit like how much of the stuff I was reading did actually happen, or how much of it could have been just changed, you know, without her really realising it. Yeah, so, but I did really enjoy this one. The story was really good. Can't believe it, really. Really inspiring. You can basically, you know, kind of just inspire you that you can achieve anything you want to achieve if you put in the hard work for it, and that you have to be prepared to sometimes fight for your dream and fight for things to happen, and sometimes you do have to make hard sacrifices for it as well. So I give this a 4 out of 5 stars overall. Really enjoyed it. Please vaccinate your children. And the last book I finished, which is the only book I finished this week so far, is The Everlasting Rose by Dhonielle Clayton. This is the second book in the Bells trilogy. Seems to be going to be a trilogy. This definitely finishes up like it was a duology, so I am confused. The Bells is set in a kind of fantasy / dystopian world where I think it's a fantasy world now. I thought it was a dystopian first, but I'm starting to think it's a fantasy. It just has a lot of roots in the real world. Set in a world where basically everyone is born kind of without any colour, kind of this grey, white, sickly, not very nice, and then there are these particular people who are born, they are called the Bells, and they are able to make people beautiful basically, and they are kind of used as tools. In the first book we see the Bells go to the royal palace. One of the Bells is chosen as the favourite of the next queen, and we see a Belle called Cammy become the favourite, and she kind of learns that even though everything seems to be very, very beautiful, there's actually a lot of ugliness underneath it all, and maybe being beautiful isn't as, you know, good as they all make it out to be. So this is a lot of just basically Cammy running away from things that happen in the first book and trying to figure out how to fix things, kind of becoming a little bit of a leader but not really a leader. And yeah, I don't know about this book. The first book I think I gave the first book a 4 star when I first read it, but it's definitely more of a 3 star. This book was a 3 star as well. I am just not blown away by this world the way I should be. I think the flowery writing masks a little bit of the simplicity of the overall plot, and you're like, ooh, this writing's really, really nice, but actually deep down the plot and everything that's happening aren't actually that impressive, and are actually a little bit boring. Like, I actually felt very bored reading a lot of this book. I feel like I was just waiting for something to happen and it never happened. The way it wrapped up was just like a very dull blah. Like, it was just so, it was just so nothing. It was just nothing for me. Yeah, I want to like these books, but I just didn't really. Yeah, and I'm really confused about why there's a third book, because this definitely ended up like it was just going to be a duology. So I'm really confused. So I gave this a 3 star. Maybe it's actually a 2.5 now that I'm talking about it and I seem to really not like it. But it's definitely just like a low 3 star for me. It was okay. So that's everything I've read this week. Please let me know what you guys think. Please leave your comments down below, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye!